So what have been some of your, especially in media, what have you seen as far as the conversations around anti-Blackness, around even you yourself trying to access spaces as a Black journalist and still seeing certain gates and gatekeepers?
Well, that having gatekeepers in place, I feel like has been the overarching theme of my journey, quite honestly, you know, because I have cis-assuming privilege, which we've talked about in the past behind closed doors.
And let's just break it down for the people, because we're educating Hilary Swank's following here. Okay. So what is cis-assuming privilege?
Cis-assuming privilege means, how I define it is when I step in the room, people may or may not know that I'm trans. More than likely, they don't know that I'm trans off the bat. So I shoulder what it's like to walk into the room just as a Black woman, which is a lot to shoulder. Adding my transness to it is just an extra caveat, which will determine some things, I guess, with how I'm treated, how I'm received, how I'm then perceived. And so I've noticed that there's been a lot of gatekeeping, of course. And like I said, it's definitely affected my career. I love that there's been this day of reckoning that I'm seeing online where people are being held accountable for their crappy behavior and crappy treatment. And then, of course, the intersectionality of existing as a Black trans woman in the larger Black Lives Matter discussion and in the movement has been something that has been very interesting to navigate during this particular moment in time. It's been very interesting to navigate, and it hasn't always felt good, you know, but we're here.
But we are here at this moment, and the mic is on. The mic is Precious Brady Davis,
Miss Ross.
Precious Brady Davis. I miss you so much.
I miss you so much. It like brings me to tears. I am so happy for you and everything that you've done. I've always known it that you were a star, and I just am over the moon thrilled for you.
But likewise, because let me tell you one thing that I want folks who are going to be watching and listening. I met you, and I always tell this story, but I met you when I was performing drag in a drag bar in Chicago. And you came in, and just this young, fresh, queer person that was just like, I want to do that. I want to perform. I want to do shows, you know. And I just remember telling you, you totally can do those shows, but these are going to be here for you. When you told me that you also came to Chicago to get your education and to go to college, I basically spoken to you like, baby, please stay on that track.
Stay in school.
Stay in school, and that this drag stuff will be here when you get back. And since then, you have gone and been an example of what I always try to encourage people to do when it comes to advocacy. And when it comes to advocacy as a trans, but I was saying is that the greatest form of advocacy is being successful from wherever your place of success is. So as a Black trans woman, you have been in spaces not because they wanted to put a Black person in there, a Black trans woman, but because you were qualified to help run departments at the Columbia College, because you were qualified to help run departments at the LGBTQ Center in Chicago, because you were qualified to work with the environmental agency, the government environmental agency. So can you give folks an introduction into who Precious Davis is, what you're currently doing, and give sort of like a history of your expertise and experience as a Black trans woman?
Yeah, thank you, Angelica, so much for having me. This gave me a reason to get dressed today. My new title is Mother, and I'm getting used to that. I wake up and I take care of my baby all day and make sure that she is laughing and that she is smiling and that she is eating. And so it's nice to dwell back into something for me, for mom today. But when I was in high school, I was greatly involved in my youth group, which was a Pentecostal, Holy Ghost, tongue-talking kind of church. And I was being reared up to be the next great evangelist. In Omaha, Nebraska, people look up to people like T.D. Jakes. And on the flip side, during high school, I started getting involved in community diversity programming. And I found that the community diversity work, I found a place that I could actually be me holistically. And so when I came to Chicago, I originally came to Chicago because like you said, I wanted to be a performer. And I'm writing a book right now. I've always been me. And I'm actually writing about this right now. This is pre-RuPaul's Drag Race. Like the one of the only queer symbols that was visibly queer and Black was RuPaul. So I saw that as the greatest opportunity for success in my life. And so when I ran into you, when you were working in Boys Town, you were probably the darkest of the Black people working on the strip. So it was such a phenomenon to me, and at the place that you worked, because that's where the most beautiful girls worked. And I was still a gender nonconforming boy at the time. And you were this luscious trans goddess. But I ended up finishing my education and I continued doing drag. But in that same community, there was this community onslaught called Take Back Boys Town. They didn't want the queer and trans young people of color hanging out in the neighborhood because they weren't old enough to get in the bars. They weren't spending money. They said that they weren't actively participating in the economy or the entertainment district. And I thought to myself, these are the same people who tip me on stage. These are the same people who rush to get a photo with me and want to hang out with me in bars. And seeing those young people outside of hanging out the nightclub that I worked at, I said to myself, I have a degree. I don't have to do this. I do this because I choose to. And so I decided that I would go work at the LGBT Center. And I worked there for 3 years. And when I started at the center, I said, I am going to work here for 3 years. Come hell or high water, I'm going to put 3 years on my resume so that people can see that I was faithful and that I had a solid place to build my career from. And even in that, I was the first trans woman of color on paid staff at the center. And I transitioned while I worked there. And that was a challenge in itself. The administration refused to even change my name in the email system. And this is a 6-month fight that I went on with the LGBT Center. I had people tell me that I was never going to be promoted. I remember there was an office that became vacant that was around the corner from the cubicle that I sat at. And I said, I can't wait to have that office. The chief program officer of the center looked at me and said, oh, that will never happen. And it was at that moment that I said to myself, once again, I don't have to do this. I have a degree. I will go back to the college that I graduated from, and I will lead diversity programming because there was an opening for someone to oversee their diversity initiatives. And even as a student at Columbia, I remember in my gender nonconforming state, I would walk into a class up in pumps. You know, I would have a bow in my hair. And I had
Miss Precious, you did the most. And that's what I live for you, because you were always on 1000.
Pentecostal. I mean, when you come from wearing ostrich shoes, zoot suits, Jerry curl hair, that was the life that I came from. And so I brought that into the LGBT community. Also, I came from Nebraska. In Nebraska, Iowa, the Bible Belt, baby, those kids do drag. I mean, it is big hair. It is big makeup. So I came from that culture. And so even at Columbia, I dealt with the internalized discrimination, and I had to take on the system. And once again, Raquel has joined us. Hi, Raquel.
I just saw. Hey, Raquel.
And so part of my work is going into communities and spaces and leaving them better than I found them. And then finally, when I was at Columbia, when I was there for another 3 years, and Columbia sent me all over the beautiful U.S. city. And they wanted to continue. They wanted to send me abroad. But one, I wanted to be home with my husband. Number two, I was starting to encounter lots of minority young people who couldn't afford an arts education. And I felt the institution wasn't taking enough of an initiative to fund these students. That diversity was a banner and a moniker of their branding, but I felt like they weren't taking the institutional steps needed to actually empower these students. And I was like, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be a part of that. And around that time, we see the election of Donald J. Trump as the 45th president of the United States. And I was on the college diversity. I was on the committee for the college. And there were other women of color there who did not respect my